Thank you, Sami, and welcome everyone. So I'm Neil Ebenezer, and as Sami says, the team leader of the High Volume Transport Applied Research Program. So thank you very much for taking the time this morning to listen to the webinar today. I'll provide a brief introduction to the HVT program and then talk through a little bit about the TTRIT program or projects that sit within that bigger program. So HVT, as was said, was launched in 2018 and is a 7-year, £18 million investment by the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, the FCDO. And this was really to undertake research into the complex issues of sustainable transport development across Africa and South Asia. HVT is providing a body of research to help better inform the decisions of policymakers and planners and make road, rail transport greener, safer, more accessible, affordable, and inclusive. And the program as a whole aims to create an understanding for decision makers and practitioners of the key issues and challenges to create sustainable and resilient transport. We build the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of researchers, policymakers, and others involved in the research that we support. And the research leads directly or indirectly to instrumental changes in policy, program, and transport practices. So some of the key areas of focus have been around inclusion, climate change, crisis response, access and infrastructure, and policy and planning. And one example of a project on sort of resilient transport infrastructure will actually be discussed this afternoon by Professor Jim Hall. And in the link, I will provide a chat. And please register for this. It's this afternoon. And you'll get to hear more in detail about one specific project. But this morning, we're really here talking about the innovation piece that HVT has supported. And innovation is absolutely crucial in these areas. And the TTRIT program within HVT was developed to better support this. So since 2018, HVT has supported 3 calls for innovative projects and has funded around 40 different projects during this time. And this included a rapid response call to address some of the challenges of COVID. And today I'm really delighted that we can discuss 4 projects from Africa. On Tuesday, we heard from 5 projects from Asia. And today we'll learn a bit more about the projects that are addressing some of the key challenges that Africa is facing. So I'll hand back to Sami now, but please keep your questions coming. Use the functions on the screen and try to make this as interactive as possible. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Neil. And so for our first presentation today, it is from Michael Wanyama from Auto Safety Uganda. And his project is looking at tackling Africa's road emissions from the source.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Wanyama, the team leader at the Auto Safety Uganda program. And please allow me to share some insights into our FCDO-funded TTRIT project that has been managed by the High Volume Transport Program. Our project was called Auto Safety Uganda, a Raga chapter, and it's a project that is aimed at tackling Africa's road transport crashes and emissions from the source. And from the source, we mean from the communities where the emissions happen from. First of all, the problem we have in Africa, and basically this is a case study in Kampala, but it's a problem that cuts across many African cities, especially in urban poor settlements. So Uganda has about 2.3 million vehicles right now, and the average age is about 15 years. And of these vehicles, 90% of them are used imports. These, when they come here, they are exposed to poor maintenance practices, underdeveloped infrastructure amidst poor or weak regulations, and this poses long-term negative impacts. As you can see from here, these images were taken from the communities where we do our work, where we engage the people, especially the mechanics. You find that in a short span, these vehicles, as they go through the maintenance routines, several times they are modified without any standards or procedures followed. You find cat converters are stolen at a higher rate, and there are several other modifications that are made that highly compromise the inbuilt safety and emission controls within these vehicles, and hence turning them unsafe and then also environmental hazards. So the vast majority of the vehicles in the country, the repairs on them are done in makeshift settings where the mechanics have no skills, they don't have appropriate tools, and this highly compromises the roadworthiness of these vehicles. We have inadequate data on the safety defects and vehicular emissions within the country, and there's very limited awareness and capacity for safe and eco-friendly motoring among the general public. By this, I mean, when you consider the myths that are surrounding transport in Africa, an example is that people think, and they have always perceived it, that some diesel engines are supposed to be idling from the moment the vehicle starts to the destination. Whether it takes maybe 20 hours, like whatever time it takes, they want that to be idling all the time. So you find that during traffic peak hours, there's going to be a lot of emissions because of the idling engines, and these engines are not really in good condition. So this only adds to the problem that we already have. And the fact that the informal sector dominates the public transportation business, it means a lot of emissions are coming out of the public transport businesses. So you find that while governments are looking at transforming this, the damage being done by the current fleets is really a tremendous load to carry. So our intervention framework is informal research and community engagement, where we engage the communities, particularly considering the technical workforce, and these are the mechanics, and our transport associations, especially for the public transportation business associations, and a few companies, but mostly we do focus on the mechanics. And we partner with a government institution, basically the lead agency, that's the Ministry of Works and Transport. However, we also have some connections with the Ministry of Energy, the Bureau of Standards, and a few others. We're also working with Makerere University. This is our Uganda's lead academic institution, academic and research institution. We are working with them to engage communities. So with that, we are able to contribute to the formulation of the safety and emission standards around transport and infrastructure in Uganda. And this also has to do with business leaders in terms of manufacturing, fuel. And then also we make sure that we create citizen awareness on safe and green mobility alternatives. But all in all, we put the mechanic in the middle because this is a key stakeholder in either reducing or increasing the emissions that are coming out of vehicles. Like I said earlier, a mechanic is one person who is the easy go-to for anyone who wants to buy an automobile. They will always seek for the mechanic, his technical advice, but you find that in many cases, the person with whom they are consulting also lacks the knowledge on which vehicle is eco-friendly, the proper maintenance procedures, like even just knowing how much one would incur, like the overall cost of ownership of a vehicle. So we try to engage these mechanics to see that they lead the change, they act as agents of change towards a green mobility in Uganda and Africa at large. So what we've done so far through this TIPS project, we have engaged over 500 local mechanics, and these are young men and women who between the age of about 16, 18 to 35. These include the real mechanics, the fabricators, and also those who deal in motor spare parts selling and other kinds of trade. But basically, they are all considered mechanics, because once these know what to sell or the proper maintenance procedures, what they need to handle, and also understanding how these various components affect safety and emissions on the roads, then we move a step towards making these vehicles at least run cleaner than they are right now, because you find that many of these vehicles come without proper documentation on pre-shipment inspection. So some of them come when they are already in bad conditions. So we've collected tailpipe emissions data specific to the African conditions. This introduced new emission factors that are overlooked by other studies. For instance, we look at how emissions are affected by the infrastructure conditions. Like, let's say, if a vehicle is running on a paved road, how does it emit as compared to when it's running on an unpaved road, or even the service condition? So we put all these different parameters into the database that we are building, and we are aiming at building more on it, maybe until we can cover about maybe 80 to 90% of the common vehicles that we have in the country. So this can inform policy better on proper regulatory measures. We've also retrofitted a vehicle as a proof of concept for advancing electric mobility in Africa. And we have efforts undergoing to retrofit for public transport in the informal sector. And as I mentioned earlier, our public transport is currently dominated by the informal sector. We don't have any kind of policies on end of life for vehicles. So you find that while Africa is still increasingly becoming a dump site for used vehicles from developed countries, these are piling up. And as while we look at green mobility alternatives, there's a lot that needs to be done about the already highly emitting fleet. So we are trying to see how we could convert some of these public transportation vehicles to electric, just to give them more extended life of service, while we look at the full transition to electric. And besides, this creates an informal, a circular economy in the informal sector, because the ownership of a new vehicle down here is really difficult for the average Ugandan. So if we could convert some of them that are highly emitting, it gives them some more value for money. So we are researching into this, how we can do it at a cost-friendly ways. We are looking at for cost-friendly ways of retrofitting for the common Ugandan. We have also fostered Kampala's adoption of Africa's first emission setting project using the plum chasing method, and this was implemented by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, UNEP, ICCT, among other partners, and we actively participated in this. And this consideration came because of the work we've done through the Street Read project. And we have also been recognized as a key stakeholder in shaping major transport regulations in the country, including the Road Safety Act amendment and the plant machinery and motor vehicle bill that is undergoing formulations. We're also strengthening partnerships, local partnerships, and even international ones through collaborative efforts. An example being recently, we have been participated in the first green mobility stakeholders forum organized in Kampala, and then also we co-organized Kampala's second car-free day. So this Street Read project has put us on a spotlight, and that is making us visible to potential partners that can help us extend our impact in the communities we serve. Thank you very much. I do welcome any questions you may have, and feel free to connect. Thank you.
Some of the questions, there were some really good questions that came through, and Michael has kindly said that he's now happy to answer some of them. So maybe I'll read out some of the questions from Moise from Lamata. And so one of the questions was about the disposing of batteries. So when training mechanics, was proper disposal of batteries, including end of life or during recycling, considered? And he goes on to make the point that in Africa, batteries are often disposed wrongly, and usually cause poisoning of the soil, which can in turn pollute the fertility of the soil.
Yeah, thank you very much. To answer the questions about batteries, when we train mechanics, we don't just consider disposal of batteries, but also anything to do with waste management, including batteries and oils. So for batteries, we have two local companies, vendors of batteries, that we work with. So we try to make a system where if the mechanics or a client of a mechanic buys a new battery, the old battery will be repossessed by this company at a small fee or a discount on the new battery. So this company can handle the recycling or the disposal of this battery. So basically, we make sure that the old batteries they don't stay within the garages, but they are taken back by the company which has supplied the new battery.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. And another question from Louise was about the cost of retrofitting an EV vehicle compared to procuring a new EV. Could you talk a little bit about the different cost structures of those two options and the incentives there?
Of course, retrofitting a vehicle to electric in Africa doesn't come cheap. It's expensive, but we are trying to see how we could make future retrofits to be cheaper by replicating some of the key components locally, so that at least when you buy the new components for the retrofit, you will have to import less, and some of the fabrications are being done here. So this is still in the early stages, but we believe in the future it will be much cheaper to retrofit some of these vehicles to electric, because still we have no end of life policies for them, and they are they're increasingly piling up. So it's only fair to find ways of keeping them running sustainably without harming the environment.
Thank you, Michael. That's great. And there was one final question from Jonathan, and it was about the idling of engines and the emissions caused by that. And so his question is that he remembers being taught that diesel engines often needed to be kept warm to protect the longevity of the engine, and buses and taxis would typically idle for this reason. And he assumes that engine technology has advanced over time, including modern diesels with stop-start technology built in. So is there any evidence now that engine wear is not compromised by turning it off while stationary? And if so, are the emissions caused by idling another issue that needs awareness raising?
Thank you. I think he even tried to answer his own question, because the advancements in engine technology has really phased out that myth of a diesel engine having to fast idle for a long time. So the newer improved fuel injection systems and better lubricants and engine management systems can really make these vehicles withstand frequent starts and stops without increasing wear. Because that old belief of keeping the engine running while stationary would be better for the engine, but there has been studies that have shown that idling causes more engine wear, because the engine is running below optimal temperature. Like some of these need to have constant in the operating temperature. So during idle, some of these engines run below operating temperature. That means it's even increasing wear. And then the shut off of engines, basically, let's say for a stop of not more than, let's say a stop of 15 seconds or more, it's really more advantageous to switch off the engine, because the fuel it takes to start the vehicle, let's say if you've been idling for if you had stopped for like 5 minutes, the fuel it takes to start the vehicle again after a stop is just a very simple, a very small fraction of what you consume when you've been idling through that time. So basically, diesel engines, since they are a significant source of pollution and contributing to high levels of NOx, particulate matter, it would be very good if we adopt eco-driving habits like lessening the idling time. Actually, when we engage the mechanics and the communities, we try so much to discourage against engine idling in traffic, because newer systems really allow for vehicles to start and stop at any time without having to cause more wear.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael, for the comprehensive answer. We did have another question about the plume chasing method, but I think in the interest of time, we're going to have to move on to the next presentation. But the person who asked the question has kindly shared their email address. So perhaps if it's okay with you, I'll share that email address and the question, and you can get back to them.
It's all right. I've seen the email is from Unique Prasanna something. I'll be able to respond to it in time. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. And thank you for the brilliant presentation as well. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So the next presentation is given by Dimitsu from Mekelle University, and his project is looking at safety and mobility challenges of persons with disabilities in Mekelle City towards inclusive transport.
Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. I am Othctober Mariam from Mekelle University. Here in this session, I will present our research work titled Safety and Mobility Challenges of People with Disability in Mekelle City towards Inclusive Urban Transport. The research was carried out in Mekelle City, northern Ethiopia, and the project duration was 6 months, starting from 1st July 2023. When we see the motivation to this research, there is one encouraging point that Ethiopia, as a UN member state, has been adopting and implementing a number of conventions, policies, and laws pertaining to people with disabilities. However, in the country, people with disabilities inclusion is still far from realization, and there exists low attitude towards inclusive development, and there are so many problems with the existing policies and law enforcement. The objectives of this study were to assess the suitability of the existing transport system for people with disabilities, to develop disability inclusive policy brief and disability inclusive transport infrastructure design and implementation guide. The expected outcomes and impacts were improved awareness and capacity of stakeholders, improved law enforcement, inclusive urban transport policy, improved transport infrastructure design and implementation, improved safety, mobility, and the level of satisfaction of all pedestrian groups. The research approach consists a series of literature review and development of questionnaires and data collection forms, including and validation of this questionnaires and data collection forms, training to data collectors, project briefing to key government offices and disability associations, inception workshops, data collection, including interviews, focus group discussions, and on-site assessments. And finally, we analyze the data and we prepare the draft report. And finally, we carried out validation workshop in the presence of various stakeholders, and we prepare the final report. When I come to the key findings of this research work, of course, I will not go through all our research findings, but to mention the key points. Mekelle City's public building entrances and street sidewalks were not inclusive for people with disabilities. Pedestrian facilities were poorly accessible and unsafe as a result of problems in design and inadequate management. Road sidewalks and access ramps to public buildings were highly problematic to people with disabilities. Assessment made on walkability of the main streets of the city indicates that the overall walkability index of the main streets is found below average. The existing sidewalks are narrow, full of roadside obstacles and encroachments, and they are poorly managed. Of course, the problems with sidewalks is vast. Ramps of public buildings are poorly designed in terms of location, slope, landing, and width. Public transport in the city where not people with disabilities inclusive, vehicle entrance were inaccessible, and sometimes they do not have even space for wheelchairs. And the public transport stops in the city were limited in number and with no ramps and tactile guidance, no signage and information to help this various types of disabled individuals, including those vision impaired individuals, and the shelters were in unusable condition. Regarding the policy-related issues, inclusive directives and guidelines were available for public buildings, but their enforcement was found poor. But there are no disability inclusive transport infrastructure directives and guidelines in the city. The planning, design, and implementation of transport systems in the city are carried out without proper consultation with people with disabilities, which is a big problem. Available policies, directives, and implementation guidelines were not properly communicated among the various stakeholders, resulting in confusion among these stakeholders. The awareness of government personnel, architects, engineers, and public service providers is low. When you give chance to the disabled individuals talk about their experience in dealing with the transport system in the city, they would provide you with so many heartbreaking stories that everyone must consider. Here in the screen, you could see some of the stories of this people with disabilities. When you see the key recommendations of this research project, Magala City and other cities in low-income countries should develop not only disability-inclusive policies, but also inclusive directives and guidelines. The policy by itself is not a solution. Of course, we should have a policy, but that policy should be supported with implementing directives and guidelines. Continuous awareness programs together with strong law enforcement works should be considered. Everyone should have an understanding that people with disabilities have equal right to access the public transport infrastructures and services. Providing safe and accessible transport infrastructure is not a privilege, but it is a right to this disadvantaged groups. Consultation to people with disabilities should be considered in policy making, during planning and design and implementation of the transport infrastructures and services. Cities in low-income countries should exercise universal design of transport facilities and services. Of course, they should have promote universal design. And last but not least, focus should be given to small and low-cost interventions as an initial step to promote safety and accessibility of people with disabilities. When we come to the outputs of this research project, we have already prepared the project report, and we have prepared the policy brief document and disability inclusive transport infrastructure design and implementation guide, and we are on progress to publish our research project on reputable journal. In practice, created so far, considering small and low-cost interventions in the design of sidewalks in the streets rehabilitation works of Magala City, we able to revise the initial design of streets in the city center, and we got better results, though these interventions are not yet assessed from either's perspective. There are ongoing projects in Magala City, and we, the research team and we as in Magale University School of Civil Engineering have participation in the project. So we able to create some awareness, and we able to participate in the design revision of this status, and we have come up with so many small modifications on this status that could improve the safety and mobility of pedestrians in general and persons with disabilities in particular. So I think finally we could have a better design and construction of streets. Awareness creation works were carried through meetings, workshops, trainings, on-site discussions of ongoing projects in the city, though much work is still needed in the future. Finally, I would like to thank UK DQ Global High Volume Transport Applied Research Program for giving us this chance to work on this interesting topic. And I would like to thank Magale City Municipality and Magale University. Thank you for watching. You can read more at transportlinks.com of the HVT website regarding this documents. And if you have any question, you can forward us through this email address. Thank you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dimitsu, for the great presentation. I can see that Helen shared the policy brief for your work, so that's really helpful. So other people can dive into that if they're of interest. I see a couple of questions that have come up in the panelist Q&A. So one is from Louise. How did you deal with the street traders and encroachment on the sidewalks? Hello. Hi.
Hello. Is that audible?
We can hear you well. Shall I repeat the question?
Okay, thank you. Of course, the street traders or street vendors are part of the streets. Of course, we need to consider this street traders in designing our streets. We need to provide them space on the streets. So what we did is, of course, when we modify the typical sections of the streets, we would have allocate spaces for the furniture, for the pedestrians, and for the frontage zone. So on the furniture zone, we'd have the straight poles, the utility poles, the trees, and some greenery areas. And within that space, we would have the spaces for street vendors. So what we did is to consider the street vendors on the streets, on the street designs. So we cannot totally ignore the street vendors because they are part of the street. This encroachments, of course, there are encroachments from nearby traders are some of the major challenges on the streets of Magale City. So what we did is we on the design and construction, we allocate space for furniture, for pedestrian way, and we have the frontage zone. But this encouragements from nearby cafes or shopping areas, they don't have to extend to the walkway. So it will be a management part of the street management. We suggest the municipality to address these encroachments because they affect the mobility, the direct movement of the pedestrians in general, because they block the sidewalk. So this should be part of the sidewalk management during operation.
Great, many thanks, Dimitsu. And a follow-up question from Louise is, do they all have permits or only pay rent?
Yeah, for the street vendors.
Yes, Timsesh.
Okay. Actually, these street vendors do not, usually they are informal traders on the streets. So far, they don't have dedicated space for them. So once they make their trade on one point, and the other time they shift to another to another place. And there are also some street vendors who use their trading on a specific location. Of course, this they don't have so far. They don't have to pay for the spot they are using. Actually, that was not our point so far. What we are looking for was to dedicate a space for this street vendors so that they cannot affect the through movement of pedestrians. When it comes for the payment of that specific location, we believe and we suggest the municipality to arrange some payment or rental fees for that specific location. So this street vendors should not affect the overall visibility of the streets. At the same time, they should not block the free movement of pedestrians. So they should, we believe and we suggest to the municipality to arrange some modality of payment for that specific location, and they should not be allowed to expand their space utilization to the pedestrian ways.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dimitsu. I think in the interest of time, we're going to have to move on to the next presentation, and hopefully that will mean that we can go back to the questions that the participants had for Michael, who I think is able to join shortly. So the next presentation is by Mark Diamond from Integrated Transport Planning, or ITP, and their project was on computer vision for public transport.
So hi folks, I'm Mark Diamond from Integrated Transport Planning, here to talk to you about computer vision for transport data collection in low and middle income countries. My expertise is public transport, particularly urban public transport, and data science. So we work a lot on at the intersection of those two things. This is a project that my colleagues Giles Lipscomb and I have worked on for the Teacherage project over almost a year now. So just to explain the project, as you can imagine, doing transport planning in low and middle income countries needs good data, but it's quite common in those countries to not have really kind of amazing data availability in the way you might in developed countries where there's lots of sensors and lots of data collection going on. So there are ways to get around that, but it often kind of results in the transport planning that's able to take place being a little bit more limited. So relying on things like personal experience or just kind of what has worked elsewhere rather than what's specifically relevant to the local context based on data. So the idea that we had was to use a data set called Mapillary. Some people will be familiar with Mapillary, I'm sure. There's a sort of example of some data there from it on in the top left. It's very simple kind of dash cam style images of a street taken from a car typically, or a motorbike, something like that. This data is crowdsourced, so people just record it themselves for their own different reasons and upload it to a website. It's very similar for those of you that might be familiar with Google Street View. It's very similar to that. The idea of this project was to apply AI, particularly kind of AI known as computer vision. So it's quite possible nowadays to look at an image in the top left and get an understanding from the computer of what actually you're seeing in kind of formal computerized terms. And you can see that the computer doesn't know perfectly, but it has some sort of reasonable estimates and gives you a probability of kind of how sure it is. The nice thing about all of this data is it's tagged with coordinates, it's geotagged. So we can actually kind of build up quite a detailed picture of different kinds of transport features across a particular city. So this city on the right here is Bo in Sierra Leone. It's not a city we had an ongoing project in. It's one we did for the purposes of the TTRID work. And what we're able to do is the sort of image labeling that you see on the left-hand side, as I say, it's geotagged. We actually aggregate each labeled image and put them across the whole map of Bo, and that gives us a fairly good understanding of what there is and where. And so that's particularly useful because if we're thinking about it making investments for pedestrians or cyclists or buses, it's really useful to know where those things are. Likewise, we might want to think about, well, if Bo has got lots of traffic congestion, can we understand where exactly that is, what's causing it? Is it particular types of vehicles, particular neighborhoods? So this is actually prevalence of motorcycles in Bo that we're seeing. Some of you will be aware, sub-Saharan Africa, lots of use of motorcycles as kind of informal transport for so you'd have a rider and a passenger typically, and sometimes more than one passenger. So some of the things we're trying to do, this kind of analysis, we want it to be fairly cheap and easy to use, and we want it to produce data that's relevant to the types of projects that we're doing. I should stress that this isn't replacing typical traffic counting, which some people may be aware traffic counting in developed countries in particular is very common. And actually there are sort of whole companies that do it, and they often do it with their own AI computer vision tools nowadays. And I'm sure we'll see that grow over the next 5 or 10 years in low and middle income countries too. So this is an example of the sort of geographic spread of the mapillary data this is actually Maputo in Mozambique. And we can understand where we might be able to get this sort of intelligence. And you have to kind of make a trade-off, because with crowdsourced data, not everybody has kind of recorded exactly the data you need to know. On top of that data, we then apply our kind of clever computer vision algorithms. What's interesting here is that I mentioned the sort of concept of these motorcycle taxis. That's something that is obviously kind of very important to understand in the sub-Saharan African context. A lot of these computer vision algorithms were sort of trained in places like San Francisco and California, not necessarily the same sort of modes of transport available there as are available in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's some kind of rejigging needed to make sure that the data that comes out of the computer vision model can be used in a sort of transport planning context in low and middle income countries. So there's another example of that here, three-wheelers, for instance. We need to think about the sort of different types of algorithms that are available and what our computer vision algorithm is trying to look for. So three-wheelers obviously being very important in a lot of these cities as well. There's a distinction to make between, as I sort of mentioned, the closed set object detectors that are sort of your kind of developed world car, bus, truck, maybe motorbike, versus the kind of specific low-income country context of particular transport, like three-wheelers, which are of course very popular. So this is something we're going to continue to look at after the TTRID work, because it's definitely a way we can refine the outputs of our model. After that processing, though, there's some post-processing to do. So we aggregate up the data, and it's quite important to kind of understand a few of these different issues to get like what is actually happening on the street. If you're following a car in traffic, as you might be with this sort of data collected by a sort of third person, doing it on a crowdsourced basis, you need to kind of work out how you filter out some stuff that you sort of don't want to get repeated data counted more than once. So we do some averaging and some aggregation, which helps address that. And this is the kind of output that we see. So like you can see here, for example, this is the number of people counted across Bow. If I move the slide on to the number of cars, that's interesting as well, because straight away you can see that there's parts of the city where cars are high prevalence, but also so are people. And so that instantly kind of raises the possibility, could there be road safety issues there? And actually where that's kind of fairly straightforward intuition, but there's some thinking to do about this, I suppose, is this doesn't replace traffic counts, is what I'm trying to emphasize. So one of the nice things that we can also get from this data, and this is from the Maputo and the Mapillary data set as well, it's actually, because all of this data is geo-referenced, you can quite quickly just understand how fast a car was driving. And if you know when that was and where it was in the city, that's in itself quite useful, because it's no surprise really that the downtown Maputo is a bit slower. On the outskirts, there are places with faster traffic. There are still some slow-moving corridors. This project was actually, this output actually produced for a kind of parallel project that ITP was able to work on in Maputo, where we're hopefully going to help with a BRT, I think. So just moving on briefly to the lessons and impact of the work. So yeah, I think it's worth emphasizing that these sorts of outputs can take some interpreting. So this idea originally came from one of our projects in Tajikistan. This is Dushanbe, the capital of Tajikistan. And you can sort of see in the east of the city here, this is the kind of downtown area, lots of prevalence of persons. So what that means is pedestrians walking around the city, lots of it in the outskirts as well. That's also quite interesting. And again, that sort of that intuition that maybe there are concerns where there's high numbers of cars and high numbers of people. But more broadly, there's a sort of challenge here. When you've got loads of this kind of data, it's sort of starts to get less useful because you have so much of it. And this is something interesting we learned from the project. So actually, I think just looking at the car stuff here doesn't tell us quite so much, because we kind of know where cars are driving in Dushanbe. So there's a few things to think about there, and it kind of needs some intelligence and applying the data in different ways. It doesn't answer all of our transport questions, but we see it as sort of a first step in cities with little or no data. And so we'd always obviously want to continue to work with partners and with experts in those cities, because those are the ones that are going to have access to what data is available. Crowdsourcing won't give you everything, but we see it as it can kind of help lower the costs of data collection and kind of bring some of these types of sort of transport strategy projects more into the realms of possibility for cities in developing countries. So how can you use it? There's all sorts of ways to use computer vision generally. I won't have time to go into them all now, but yeah, it's basically an evolving field. This is one way it can be used for public transport strategy in particular. But one of the things that our teams are finding, not just in low and middle income countries, but also in the UK and in places all over the world, is that lots of people have kind of got CCTV data that they could be it could be processing. It's kind of capturing transport data without them even realizing it. One thing that's worth emphasizing is there's issues of kind of privacy and sort of legal implications. So that's something that's always worth thinking about, because you don't want to sort of end up capturing minute details about people's lives without thinking through the kind of ethical implications as well, really. So there's all sorts of ways computer vision can be applied. This is just a quick example of that. But yeah, please get in touch if you have questions to Giles or me. Thanks very much.
I can see we've had a question in from Jonathan. And the question is, I was not clear whether the computer vision could distinguish between a private motorcycle and a two-wheel motorcycle taxi, and if so, how? And he's given the example that in Nepal, the phone holder on the handlebars is the most obvious sign that it's a taxi, I imagine.
Thanks, Sammy. Hi, folks. Yeah, that's... Sorry, I realised can you hear me now? Yes, cool. So yeah, thanks, Sammy, and hi, everybody. Yeah, that's a good question. That is something we'd identified over the course of the project, actually. So motorcycle taxis and three-wheeler taxis of various kinds. Kind of these computer vision models are typically trained in places like California or Western Europe somewhere. So those types of transport not necessarily as common. One of the things we'd looked at in West Africa was the possibility that motorcycle taxis could be recognized by the presence of at least two people, and typically the kind of driver would be wearing a helmet. So I mean, that is the sort of thing that if computer vision is pretty good nowadays, so if you can kind of describe it in human terms, then it's probable that we'll be able to eventually detect it with computers as well. And our tool isn't quite at the state where you could see what I just described, sort of say motorcycle plus rider plus helmet plus second rider. That is something that we probably could. It would be technologically feasible within a relatively short space of time. But yeah, at the moment, what we just see is motorcycles. So like I say, I think that could probably be fixed fairly soon. It's not something we've been able to fix over the course of this project, I don't think.
Great, thank you. We'll just see if any more questions pop up in the Q&A. But maybe one just about the cost model. How is it that costs are kept low compared to I guess more orthodox transport data collection methods?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sammy. So they're extremely low if you're able to use the Mapillary dataset, because of course Mapillary is actually owned by Facebook. So it's, like I say, a kind of crowdsourced model, and that means that accessing the data, even at pretty big scale, so for Bo and Sierra Leone, and also for Dushanbe and Tajikistan, we were looking at kind of tens of thousands of images being processed to produce those maps you saw. That actually using the tool that we've developed, that now actually takes a couple of hours of human time to put that together, which makes it much more straightforward than kind of procuring a surveyor. Training a surveyor is often necessary if it's the sort of place where in Western countries we would often have transport survey companies that kind of go out and do this stuff every day. Some African countries do have those sorts of companies, I'm sure, but some don't. And so that means if it's quite an expensive process to go and train surveyors. And what that often means is these types of kind of transport strategy projects that need some data, but not loads. That doesn't necessarily happen just because there isn't the budget to kind of spend $50,000 training surveyors. Whereas if me or one of my colleagues spend just a couple of hours kind of looking at Mapillary, and Mapillary has enough data to run through most parts of the city, then yeah, it kind of does mean that like a couple of hours of our time is a bit more affordable than that $50,000. So that's how the costing in theory should work. But yeah, it's kind of nice. It works nicely in Central Asian countries as well, because former Soviet republics are quite keen on collecting dashcam imagery for various cultural reasons. So it works nicely in parts of Africa, but also in Central Asia.
That's great. Thanks so much, Mark, for the presentation and your responses to some of the questions. Thank you. Okay, well, moving on to the final presentation of today's webinar. This is it's going to be presented by Tim Durant, and then colleagues from LMICs, so Sean and Muiz, are going to be available to answer Q&A questions, and their research project was on inclusive interchanges.
Thank you for the opportunity to present about the Inclusive Interchanges project. My name is Tim Durant, and I am an Associate Director in the Mobility Planning team at SLR. For this project, we were very pleased to work with the Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, referred to as LMICs. During the presentation, I will introduce the aims and methodology of the project, provide an overview of the Inclusive Interchanges design brief output made available for transport planning practitioners, and present some important results from the Lagos case studies. So with this project, we wanted to concentrate on the central role of multimodal interchanges within mobility networks. Getting the design of these complex facilities right is key to promoting low carbon, efficient, and inclusive mobility, while getting design aspects wrong could discourage passengers from using public transport. These general statements apply all over the world, but in the case of African cities, we see that there is an additional challenge of how existing informal public transport services, such as Danfos in Lagos, could be integrated with formal modes at interchange locations. Before commencing this work with LMICs, I was involved in the HVT Transitions project, which highlighted the important ongoing role of informal public transport and the need for better infrastructure to support ongoing improvements to these services. When naming the project, we therefore had two aspects of inclusion in mind. Firstly, the design of socially inclusive interchanges that are safe and convenient to use by people regardless of gender, age, or disability. And secondly, the design of sectorally inclusive interchanges where consideration is given to how informal transport, retail, and commercial interests can be accommodated in a mutually beneficial way. Based on these broader principles, the practical aim of the project was to develop and pilot an inclusive interchanges design brief. This document comprises a design guidance and appraisal template for use by public transport and urban planning authorities. The methodology of the project involved a review of existing interchange design guidelines, development of a draft design brief template, and use of this to undertake appraisals of 2 interchanges. We undertook site visits with LMICs and held meetings with formal and informal transport sector representatives. And finally, a pilot passenger survey was also carried out. I would now like to present the overall structure of the design brief document and the topics it covers, before then moving on to highlight a couple of issues arising during the Lagos case study appraisals, focusing on the integration of informal sector activities. Our goal has been to keep the template concise and easy to apply, while also ensuring we cover all important topics. The design brief is therefore broken down into 5 main sections: context and design appraisal, recording information on the main transport modes and the opportunities and challenges presented by the interchange location, multimodal sustainable mobility, which addresses the interchange layout and experience between modes, as well as planning considerations for the different modes of transport, comfort and safety. This covers the essential requirements that passengers would expect, such as a clean and secure environment and places to rest on a long journey. The following section, Hubs for Public Life, covers the opportunities to create a more vibrant location within the city through providing for retail and opportunities for public art. And finally, integrated planning and design. This section raises points about the energy efficiency of the building, designing for city resilience, as well as wider opportunities for transit-oriented development. In total, the design brief template promotes consideration of 55 different topics. So we now move on to introduce the 2 case study interchanges in Lagos, both of which are located on the Blue Line Metropolitan Railway that commenced operation in 2023. Mile 2 railway station is in a location dominated by the junction of 2 motorways. The proposed design for Mile 2 encompasses the existing rail station and proposes significant new development within the loops of the motorway junction to provide new BRT, interstate and intercity bus terminals. The design team has also made significant efforts to provide access by walking and cycling in a challenging context. Moving east along the Blue Line, the new interchange at Marina is located close to the central business district of Lagos. This will make use of an underutilized strip of land along the waterfront, also providing new terminals for rail, bus and ferry services. To enable the ongoing operation of informal public transport at Mile 2, it is planned that laybys will be retained in the existing location used by DAMFOs for the collection and drop-off of passengers. Additionally, it is planned that one terminal within the loops of the expressway junction will be allocated for informal transport operations. As the situation is different in Marina, with no informal transport services directly present at the site, the appraisal process recommended a study of the routes and scale of operations that might be accommodated to best complement the LMATA services. Interchanges are important locations for commerce, and the design team at LMATA has been giving consideration to how existing market trading activities at Mile 2 can be reintegrated within the new interchange. Updates to the plans include allocation of areas for use by market traders, where a rental contract with the micro enterprises would be agreed, and the provision of lockable stalls and storage sheds. Where the existing scale of trading cannot be re-accommodated on the site, nearby premises will be identified to enable relocation. Provision of training to market traders is also planned, in collaboration with the Ministry of Women's Affairs and Poverty Alleviation. Working on the case study appraisals highlighted the importance of ongoing stakeholder engagement to better understand and map informal sector activities, informing future designs and site management. For example, at Mile 2 we learned that the DAMFO unions had also assumed responsibility for allocating market trading spaces. Government-owned toilet buildings were also managed by the unions. During the project, it also became apparent that new interchanges may form a focal point for capacity building and professionalization of informal sector operators. Thanks very much for your attention. In case you're interested to learn more about the project, you're welcome to contact the team at LMATA and myself. Outputs from the project have been made available on the High Volume Transport website, transport-links.com. Thanks again. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I can see that Helen has put some links in the webinar chat for some of the outputs from this program, which are all stored on the HVT website, Transport Links. We'll just see if any Q&As come through. But maybe in the meantime, Louise and Sean, if maybe you want to come in and talk a little bit more about how the tool was piloted in Lagos and any additional reflections you might have that you might want to add to the presentation.
Sorry, Sammy, is there any question for us then? Or
just in case you want to add any additional reflections to the presentation delivered by Tim, maybe your experience of piloting the tool in Lagos.
Okay. Well, I just want to add to it, like, although, the process of actually doing this was pretty exciting. We also had, we factored in one of our previous high volume transport projects into the inclusive interchanges as well. Of course, safety was a key component of it. So we did factor in our Empower project. So everything we do in the inclusive interchange project also had a she can component. But then I would like to invite Shonaiki to just say one or two things. I think she's in the building. So
Yeah, thank you, Moise, and hello, everyone. Yeah, just as Moise had said, we had also incorporated the issue of safety, particularly for our female passengers, women and girls. So we are focusing on how we can make public transport more conducive, and safe, secure for them to use, and having to provide helplines, and authorities that they can contact where there's been a threat to their security or safety. We have used the SHECAN tool, to implement this, and so far it has been pretty successful for us. So that's just an addition to the presentation from Tim that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and really good to hear that you were able to build on the work of the SHECAN tool. That's really good. We'll just see if there's any more Q&As coming through, but if we'll just give it like an extra 10 seconds or so. Okay, well, I can see that we've only got 5 minutes left, so maybe I'll just quickly hand over to Neil, who is going to say a few closing remarks before we wrap up.
Thank you, Sammy, and thanks to all the speakers today and for people who attended this webinar. I mean, I think you'd agree that for fairly small projects, they've delivered some extraordinary developments, building on existing work in some cases, as we heard from Lamata a few minutes ago. And so what I would do is encourage folks to just look at the website. That there are links in the chat that Helen has put out in terms of the transport links, which has a body of research from HVT over the past 6 years. And this really builds on several projects, and you've heard several of them mentioned by our colleagues in Lamata on the Empower tool and SHECAN projects, but there was the Transitions, CRISP projects. So I think when you're looking at areas around informal transport and this body of knowledge that I referred to at the start, there are some really good tools, data and guidance and guidelines that have been developed as part of the HVT program. So we encourage people to make use of that. But it's also worth looking at the website over the coming months, because there'll be some new work coming through, especially on work around improving access to climate finance is really quite crucial in ensuring that some of these developments are actioned, as well as the development of a transport decarbonization index and a toolkit that will go alongside that. So thank you for your attention. We would like to encourage you to make use of the resources that HVT have developed. And if you've got any questions after this call, please get in touch through the links that you have or with Sammy or myself. But thank you, and wish you all the best in your research. Take care.
Thank you very much, Neil. And just to say as well that please do take a few minutes to provide us some feedback via the form that Helen has just shared the link to in the chat, and you can also use the QR code on the screen there as well. So we do really appreciate any feedback you can provide us. It's not a very long form. It should only take 2 minutes or so. But just, want to say thank you very much again to all the presenters and to all those who attended and asked really insightful questions. But we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.